Welcome back to my channel. My name's Evan, and I've been sailing my Tiana 37 for the last 5, close to 6 years, completely engineless. In a lot of my videos, you guys have been asking questions about how I manage this. So in this week's episode, I want to show you guys how I sail on and off the anchor without an engine. Obviously, the first thing I do is turn on all of my instruments. That's the depth sounder, chart plotter, and my tablet. After that, I like to get a visual understanding of everything around me, whether that be underwater obstacles, land masses around me, obviously different boats, and everything like that. Lobster pots even, you don't really want to snag on those. It's not as big of a deal with me because I don't have a prop, but yeah, you want to have an understanding of everything around you so that you can make sure you're avoiding it once your sails are up. After I've got a good understanding of my surroundings, the next thing I do is go and remove the bridle. And start pulling in my anchor chain. What I use to pull in my anchor chain is my big manual windlass. I prefer manual windlasses because they're more robust for the most part. They're cheaper. They don't use any power. I find them to be more reliable, and it's just an easier thing for me to operate and feel confident in. So I start pulling in my anchor chain, and here I'm in about 8 feet of water, so I pull it up to about 50 feet, which I have marked with these blue zip ties on the chain. Once I'm at about 50 feet of chain, I go and pull off my sail cover and begin raising the mainsail. Depending on the amount of wind, you obviously want to know if you're going to be putting in a single reef, 2 reefs, a 3rd reef if you have it, or the full sail. In this situation, there's only about 10 knots of wind, so I put the whole main up. Once the main's completely up, I release the main sheet so that the sail doesn't actually take any pressure and won't start sailing me back and forth on the anchor. So in these light winds, pulling the boat forward with just the manual windlass works perfectly fine. In order to not take up a whole bunch of load on the gypsy on the windlass, what I do is pull in till the slack's taken out of the chain, and then you can wait for the weight of the chain to actually pull the boat forward, and then take up that slack and continue that process until you get pretty close to pulling the anchor up off the bottom. Now this next part, picking how you're going to fall off the wind, is a little bit tricky, and it takes practice and understanding of your boat, but the more you do it, the more confident you're going to get in this, and the more likely you'll be able to fall off on the tack you're trying to fall off on. The anchor's right here below me, and now I'm falling off to starboard, but I want to go to port, so I'm going to wait for it to catch, watch the anchor. There's not a lot of wind right now, and then it'll pull me this way. See, it's catching. As I'm getting closer to having the anchor up, you'll obviously notice that the boat likes to swing from starboard to port, back and forth consistently. And you want to get a feel for when that switch is about to happen. We're on top of the anchor right now. You'll notice in the video here the stern is swinging to the starboard side, meaning the bow is turning to port. And ideally, that's when I would have wanted the anchor to pull up out of the mud. Wow, she's very dug. However, it's really stuck and doesn't free when I'm expecting it to, so I end up having to wait for the boat to go through those motions again. Hopefully we don't go the wrong way now. Crap, it's too dug in. Then once the bow starts falling to port again, I start pulling in on the anchor some more. The anchor finally comes free, and we're able to start sailing. Yeah, we're free, and I can feel that the boat's wanting to drift to port.
so no rush if there's no wind.
Now, once the boat falls away and you're going in the right direction, don't panic. Don't start like running around trying to get the sails up. You're going much slower than you're probably anticipating. And this is where having a visual understanding of everything around you comes into play. Because the more you understand your boat and the distances between everything and how it steers under sail, the more confident you'll continue to get in this process. Now, if the anchor comes off the bottom and you start falling the wrong way, the easiest and most simple thing to do in that situation is to just rest it back on the bottom, let out enough scope so that it stops you again, and restart the process. I've had to do that a few times in certain situations, so this just takes time, patience, and practice. If you don't get it the first time, it's not that big of a deal. So for me, I just pull the anchor up, pull it out of the water enough so that it's dragging just barely in there to try to clear the anchor from the mud, and then I'll go back to the cockpit. Because it's only about 10 knots of wind, I'm not going to be able to pick up a whole lot of speed with just the mainsail out, so I'll roll the genoa out, and that'll start to drive the boat forward. We'll get steerage, and we'll be underway. There are, however, certain situations where you don't necessarily want to start with the main up. I've only had to do this a couple times, but if you're trying to turn off anchor and go directly downwind, sometimes you can just pick the anchor up, the boat will start falling away, and you can go back to the cockpit, roll the genoa out, and the genoa out will pull the boat around, and you can just start sailing downwind with just the genoa, and that'll be less things to handle and easier to control. So in those situations, you can try with just the genoa. And here's a video of me doing just that in a little bay. All right, anchor's up, we're drifting. Switch is off. Too much to do. Now we're gonna roll out the head sail. In this video, I just actually sailed into Guatemala. I put myself in this tiny little bay called Cayocamado, and I was testing myself to see if I could get out of it with just the sails. There was a little bit of a situation where I got a little nervous because the boat wasn't picking up speed very fast because of the light winds. But once enough water started running past the rudder and I got steerage, it was fine, and I was able to slowly sail out. All right, now I've sailed to a new location. I'm looking at my charts, I'm understanding what is all around me, just like leaving. I'm trying to visually understand any obstacles that are in the water. And the closer and closer I get to the anchorage, I want to start to get a feel for where I'm going to drop the anchor. So, as I'm sailing up to the anchorage, you want to look for an open spot. You want to have an understanding of what the bottom's like, whether your anchor's going to hold properly. If it's grass, maybe it won't set. All of these things. you're kind of getting an idea of what's going on as you're sailing into the anchorage. As I approach the anchorage, depending on how much wind speed there is, I'll roll in the genoa a little bit to reduce speed and have more time to figure out exactly what I want to do. Now as I come up onto the spot I'm going to anchor, I'll roll the genoa in all the way and begin to turn the boat upwind. This is another situation where understanding your boat and how much momentum it carries and how far forward you're going to go before you lose speed comes into play. I don't know physically the distance it takes Dacia to slow down, but I have a pretty intuitive understanding of it. So what you do, you steer upwind. You can stay at the helm after you steer upwind, and you just keep the boat pointed into the wind. Use the wind to slow the boat down. Once the boat speed drops to about half a knot, I'll release the main sheet completely so the sail doesn't take up any pressure anymore. I'll go forward, drop the main halyard slightly to also help reduce the chances of the sail sailing you more forward, and I'll go up to the bow and watch how the boat's moving. Once the boat slows down, it'll start to drift back and fall backwards, either to the port or starboard tack. Once it starts falling backwards, you put the anchor down. Now, this is important, and I hope you guys do this even with your engines. Don't spool out all of your chain at once. Drop the anchor so that the anchor just touches the bottom, and start slowly spooling out, maybe about a 3-to-1 scope, 5-to-1 even if you want. So in this situation, I put about 50 feet of chain down and then lock off the windlass. A lot of people say they need to backwind the main in order to set the anchor, but if the wind is high enough, the weight of the boat itself sets the anchor quite well. And the way I do this is kind of the same way I pull the anchor up. As the boat's drifting back, it'll swing from port to starboard. So I'll let that 50 feet of chain out, lock it off, and see if the anchor's holding. Most of the time it does. With the boat now swung to port, it'll start to try to round back up. And as it's going through that rounding motion again, once the bow is almost completely into the wind, I'll dump another 25-30 feet of chain really fast and then lock it off. And as the boat's drifting back, it's going to pick up momentum. I hope I have an example somewhere here on video in heavier wind to show you guys, but there's been numerous times where I've been able to raise the whole anchor chain up out of the water without a problem, set the anchor really hard by doing it this way. So in this video, I've just sailed from Florida into the Bahamas right after a bit of a cold front had passed, so the wind is still pretty hard out of the north. I'd actually forgotten my bar to release the chain in the cockpit, so I had to run back and grab it, and now I'm releasing the anchor. I think off of memory the water's about 12 feet deep here, maybe a little bit less. And you'll notice the bow actually starts turning back to port right about now, because the anchor has grabbed on the bottom. As it swings to port here, you'll notice I keep looking up. This is because I'm using the land to gauge whether or not I'm drifting back still, or if the anchor has actually caught. So let's cut forward here a little bit, and you'll see I'm still judging whether or not I'm drifting back, but at this point the anchor is holding good. In this specific situation, I keep using, I guess we'll call it the swing and release technique. So as the boat rounds up through the wind, I release the gypsy, letting the chain spool out, and then lock it back off. And you'll notice right here, I release, lock it off, and then it'll drift back. And each time I do this, the anchor actually kind of gets a bit of a jar and digs in a little deeper. And now you see the bow moving to port, I release. And this you'll actually see the chain lift right up out of the water as the boat drifts back.
It's gonna set pretty hard.
See, there's quite a bit of load on that, and you know the anchor's holding good there. So yeah, I'll repeat this process a few different times, let out enough scope for what I feel comfortable with, and then once that's all good to go, I'll go back, grab everything, and start putting the bridle on. After the bridle and everything's on, I'll go back, drop the mainsail, put the sail cover back on, and we've sailed on and off the anchor effectively without any problems. One more thing I want to add here is that the reason I don't put the mainsail down right away after dropping the anchor is I want to make sure that the anchor's holding correctly before completely stowing away the sail. Just in case it starts dragging, I can raise it back up and sail myself out and away to safety. Here's an extra clip I wanted to show you guys. This is me sailing into Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas, and I want to demonstrate sailing in close quarters to other boats. So, as we've talked about earlier in the episode, you obviously want to gauge in advance, and it's really hard to do that when you're sailing in situations like this. So I wouldn't recommend it until you've gained quite a bit of experience and become fairly comfortable with your boat. But you'll see here I got this catamaran and a trawler of some kind to my port side. I've got monohulls everywhere, and this is a very crowded bay. But as I approach, I can kind of see a pocket directly in front of me. Between the boat you see here right underneath my boom, there's a small little monohull to my left and a little bit bigger ketch in front of that. So you'll see how my bow starts turning to the starboard side. What I'm doing here is giving me room to port, so when I turn upwind, I can coast in that direction. And I'm planning to sail directly behind this ketch here off to my port side. For anyone unfamiliar, the ketch is the two-masted boat. So I start rolling in the Genoa. There's the boat to my starboard side here that I'm missing off the bow, and I'll start turning upwind. But I'm still not directly into the wind here. I'm carrying a little bit of momentum, and soon here I'll start turning completely up into the wind. All of this stuff happens really slow, but I'd picked out this pocket for myself earlier as I was approaching and figured it had enough space for me. In this situation, you only really get one shot at this, so you've got to make it count. Now I've decided this is where I'm going to start turning up into the wind. You see I've kind of got this open space with no boats around me right in front, and the ketch here is coming back into the frame. You'll see that the mainsail starts to lose wind. Pretty soon here, I'm guessing, we should be directly into the wind. We are in very light winds at the moment. I'm guessing probably like 12 knots, maybe. I'm just slowly moving forward here. Hopefully you guys are enjoying watching me move my boat in a fairly tight situation. And this isn't too boring, but there we go. Now the mainsail is starting to move. And at this point I'll release the main sheet, potentially. I don't always release the main sheet, but I will always come forward and drop the main halyard. And you'll see here how I've positioned myself between the ketch and the boat to the starboard side. So in this specific situation, I think I want to get the anchor down and the boat stopped sooner, so I drop the anchor first and then go back and release the main halyard. Now you can see my forward momentum has been stopped. The main sheet there is fairly loose. So we're drifting back here. I'm releasing scope out slowly and evenly as the boat drifts back and watching the boat behind me. And I'm feeling pretty comfortable. I put myself in a good position here. Now I've cut forward, I've released more scope so the boat's drifting back harder, and you'll see it starts to catch. And the bow will start moving back to starboard here. Alright, we've anchored here in a fairly tight anchorage, and now the tricky part is going to be getting out. So now in this video we're leaving the same anchorage. You'll see the catch to my starboard side, so obviously the wind has shifted a bit since I've anchored. And this is actually a really good example of what I was saying earlier in the episode for when you pick the anchor up and the boat starts to fall into the wrong direction. Here I obviously want to turn to port, but when the anchor comes up I start drifting to starboard, so I put the anchor back down. See here I'm actually letting out some more scope after I've put the anchor back down, and the boat starts drifting to starboard. Now I'm just waiting for the anchor to start catching again, and as soon as it starts catching again I'll start pulling in on the anchor chain fairly quickly. Now you can see that the bow has stopped moving to starboard and is pulling fairly quickly back to port. I start pulling in really fast on the anchor chain and hoping that I can get the anchor to come off the bottom before it catches back on the port side. Now I'm pulling the anchor chain up by hand, meaning the anchor has freed from the bottom. And we're falling away in the direction I want to. So a little side note, I got fairly lucky and a lot of the boats have left the anchorage before me. So on the port side here, it's fairly clear and free for me to leave. So once I get back to the cockpit, I need to gain a little bit more power into the sails. The Genoa helps with that, so I roll it out as quickly as I possibly can. You can see that as the Genoa comes out, the boat starts heeling over slightly more. And a good thing to mention here is that sailing without an engine doesn't necessarily have to be stressful. A lot of it has to do with picking your timing really well. And because I picked this well and I got a little bit lucky, sailing out of this crowded harbor was fairly straightforward. With the right wind direction, I was able to just sail directly out without a problem. So, I think I covered everything there. If anybody has any suggestions or like questions they have, just let me know in the comments. And yeah, this is just how I do it. I'm sure there's other people that do things a little bit differently, but this has worked well for me in the 10,000 nautical miles I've sailed. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next week.